Jonathan, I'm so excited to finally get you on a podcast that it's not even funny. How long have I been asking you?
For a while now.
For a while.
I'm super excited to do this. Yeah, it's going to be great.
Thank you. And I got you here in Florida before you go back to college.
Yep, perfect timing.
You're leaving in a few days, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I'm obsessed with your content. Remarkably, I understand most of it, even though I'm not as nerdy as you are.
Yeah.
But I have so many questions and things I want to ask you about. So one thing that I learned on your channel is about circadian rhythm. I always thought you get up in the morning, you catch that first light, that's what affects your whole day. And then you could leave the sun the entire day. You don't need it again. Just get your 10 minutes in, you're done. I didn't realize that it still affects you all day long and you should be out there throughout the day as much as you can.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is so important. So there was this idea of a circadian dead zone, meaning that for us as humans, during the middle of the day, we cannot change our circadian rhythm. But in fact, it's pretty much completely false, this narrative. So where that idea came from was that, so we have papers looking at diurnal rodents, animal models that are asleep during the day and awake at night. So nocturnal rodents. These nocturnal rodent animal models, we basically just put a bunch of bright light in their environment. During the middle of the day, we cannot change their circadian system. But that is in nocturnal rodents. Now, if we look at diurnal rodents, we actually have literature showing that if we look at diurnal rodents and we give them bright light throughout the day, in the middle of the day, so separate from morning sunlight, in the middle of the day, bright light into these diurnal rodents' eyes can actually strengthen the amplitude, or basically the strength of that circadian system. So basically, a little background here, right? So we have a circadian system that governs every single cell, every single organ of our body.
Yes.
The main timekeeper or clock within the brain is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is in the hypothalamus of the brain. And this circadian timekeeper, I think of it as the Big Ben of your body, right? So you have this big clock within the brain that basically tells every single cell in your body what time of day it is. And the primary zeitgeber or timekeeper, the signal for that clock to set that central clock in the brain, is light. And so sunlight, or just any bright light source, when it enters our eyes, it gets absorbed by pigments in our cells called melanopsin. So these cells in our eyes are called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells.
Whoa.
These cells have, very long name. I don't know why scientists have to
Say
call
it again.
Intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells.
Wow.
And so these cells in our eyes have a pigment called melanopsin. And melanopsin absorbs blue light from the sun. So outdoors in sunlight, there's tons of blue light. I know everyone demonizes blue light, but blue light is very important. It's the amount of blue light in the wrong time is what can be detrimental, but that's another whole story. We can talk about that. But this blue light, when it gets absorbed by melanopsin in these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells in our retina, it basically sends a signal to our suprachiasmatic nucleus telling it, hey, it's daytime, right? And morning sunlight will basically set what's called the phase of the rhythm. And so that the phase is essentially when these hormones start and when they end, essentially, in the rhythmic pattern of the hormones. Now, there's the phase, but then there's also the amplitude. And the amplitude is basically how high does that rhythm go? How high does that wave go? And that amplitude is the strength. So if we can have a strong amplitude of the central clock, that goes downstream into all the other clocks. We have peripheral clocks within the body, and every single cell has its own clock, separate from the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So there's all these clocks within the body. But that central clock tells the other cells and other clocks. So if we can have a strong central clock, strong amplitude in the central clock, well, then all the rest of the cells also have a strong amplitude, a strength of this rhythm, very strong rhythm.
Wow.
And so what's important here is that bright morning light, it sets the phase, right? So it sets that circadian rhythm and anchors the rhythm in the morning. And it also will affect the amplitude, so it will strengthen the amplitude. But what's important is that bright light throughout the day, in the middle of the day, is probably the best stimulus actually to strengthen that amplitude of the circadian system.
Wow.
And this, so this basically just demolishes that idea of a circadian dead zone. So we can affect the circadian system. We cannot affect the phase of the rhythm, but we can affect the amplitude of the rhythm with bright light throughout the day. And if we think about this from a primordial standpoint, right? Us as humans, our ancestors would have been exposed to very bright light. As we mentioned, before this, we were talking about how outdoors, it can be up to 200,000 lux of very bright light versus indoors, you'll be
less
lucky.
than 1,000.
Yeah, less than 1,000. You'll be lucky if you're at 1,000. There's some devices out there now that actually are really good. There's a company called Brighter where they basically have just created the brightest light in the world. Now, it's nowhere near as good as sunlight. We're never going to be able to get a light source as good as sunlight, but it's really great. It's a great tool to brighten up the indoor environment. I measured it with my phone. There's lux meters on your phone. You can measure the lux of your room. My room is at 150 lux, so super, super dim. Although it seems bright to your eyes, right?
Yes.
I mean, I have a big window in my room. Lights are on, everything. I mean, I'm at 150 lux. I turn on Brighter, so it's super bright light. It went to over 4,000 lux of bright light. So
what a
still
difference.
Nowhere near what you're getting outdoors, but way, way better.
Yes.
And we actually have great studies on humans shining bright light in the middle of the day. We see the strength, the amplitude of the rhythm increase. And that is with above 1,000, but less than 10,000 lux. And what's important here is like, a lot of people have heard of like bright light therapy for seasonal affective disorder, SAD disease. And so that bright light is around like 10,000 lux. But what people are doing there is, it's 10,000 lux in the morning for maybe 5-10 minutes. And that's great. That's great for that morning light. But what we're really adapted to is bright light, but over a long period of time. So 10,000 lux for 5-10 minutes is great. But if we can even do like 2, 3, 4,000 lux for all day long, that's even better, right? So that's going to help that amplitude of the rhythm, strengthen the circadian rhythm. And again, the circadian rhythm governs everything. So every single downstream health consequence. I mean, pretty much every single chronic disease at its root has some sort of circadian rhythm dysfunction, right? So circadian biology is really foundational to like all of health. And it's such a simple thing. Like the takeaway is super simple, and it's like get outside as much as possible.
That's right.
And we can talk about it more, but you don't need like direct sunlight all day long, right? We want smart sun exposure.
It can be a foggy day.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be direct sunlight.
Exactly.
This is what I don't understand. Yes, I understand the food industry and things I will not name here ruining everything in life. But if we look at like World War I, World War II, and before, the therapy was you put them outside, you put them on the sunroof, you put the patients out in the sun, and that's how they would heal. How did that go away? Where did that go away? Do you know? I don't know. I'm asking you because I actually don't know.
Yeah, this is a fascinating story. So like
propaganda?
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically.
For people to get sick or stay sick.
Exactly. So a while ago, right, in the 1900s, pretty much every single hospital within the United States had what's called sunbeds. So they basically brought patients outdoors in the sun
to heal.
Yeah. And so the primary thing that they were doing this for originally was tuberculosis. And they had amazing success rates with curing tuberculosis and very bad cases of tuberculosis.
With that sun therapy.
With just sun therapy.
Wow.
Yeah. So they just put the people out in the sun and they got cured with tuberculosis. So the people behind this were Auguste Rollier, Niels Finzen. So Niels Finzen was a doctor. He won a Nobel Prize for sunlight therapy, for light therapy to primarily cure tuberculosis.
Wow.
So there was literally a Nobel Prize for this.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
My grandpa died in the 80s of tuberculosis. He was a World War II survivor. I don't think they even were doing it past like World War II or something like that, right?
Yeah. So but this is what happened essentially. So, and there's going to be tons of like conspiracy theories around all this, but I'll tell you like what the actual history is.
Yeah.
And then we can leave it for like people's judgments onto what the reason behind all this was.
Yeah.
But so essentially, you have Niels Finzen, you have Auguste Rollier who are doing this heliotherapy. That's what it was called. It was called heliotherapy. That's what they were using in these hospitals. And so what happened was, so Rockefeller, this guy who basically just wanted to make a bunch of money, it seems like, he discovered like crude oil, and that he discovered that we can actually create what's called pharmaceutical drugs with crude oil. And it was very cheap to produce, and he can, there was some benefits, because we know with all drug there's benefits, but there's also tons of side effects. He was coming out with this idea of, why don't we just give these sick patients these pharmaceutical drugs that I've invented with the crude oil that I got for super cheap, and then we can do that. But this is the problem, is that pretty much every single hospital back then was very holistically minded. So they had sunbeds, they did like cold therapy, they did a bunch of different light therapies. They did so many like very holistic practices where they weren't really open to that idea. Because they were having success with these natural approaches to healing. And so basically what happened was that Rockefeller got this guy named Flexner. So Rockefeller got Flexner, and Flexner was this dude who had basically no background in healthcare or anything. He was just basically like this random guy. And I mean, he had some background in like sociology and things like that, but he wasn't no like medical professional or anything. Rockefeller had Flexner basically go to every single hospital around the world and create what's called now the Flexner Report. The Flexner Report was this big, long report, and what Flexner said in it was basically how all of these hospitals are basically like run by crackpots, and it's all woo-woo stuff, and none of this is working, and what we need to do is give people pharmaceutical drugs.
Wow.
And so after that report is really where things sort of took a turn. No more heliotherapy, no more sunlight therapy, no more holistic approaches in the standard hospitals in the United States.
Wow.
And that's when pharmaceutical drugs came about and all that. So yeah, very, very unfortunate. And people can go read this report. I mean, it's in like, medical schools, like not curriculum, but in medical schools, like websites, they'll have like the Flexner Report because they think it was this such grand thing. Like, oh, now we really got some real science and hardcore medicine. When in fact, I probably think it probably has done more harm than good. But we really need like a healthier just handshake between allopathic and naturopathic medicine. And I think that's really the common ground here. It's like, there's people who think, all right, no Western medicine is good, and people who think no Eastern medicine is good. But I think a healthier handshake between the two is probably the best thing.
Yeah.
And that's how we're going to have the most healing in the United States. And, the chronic disease epidemic is terrible right now. I mean, cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes. I mean, it's at an all-time high. I think people are coming to understand that we can actually intervene with lifestyle interventions to absolutely reverse some of these causes, but at the very least, prevent it. the vast majority of chronic disease. I did a presentation in my intro to epidemiology class last semester, looking at a published paper that their stat was 40% of the chronic disease, 40% of cancer is absolutely preventable with lifestyle factors. I think it's probably even higher than that, but at least the conventional number, like 40%, that's huge, right? Yeah. So if we can prevent 40% of cancers with lifestyle interventions, well, we got to start talking about these lifestyle interventions, and we got to, as doctors, like doctors should be implementing these lifestyle interventions and at least like having that as the primary focus, right? And I think, we'll talk about more, but like sunlight is one of the key things there.
Yes,
I think sunlight is super, super important. A lot of people in the health and wellness space, like, all right, diet, nutrition, once you got those things, you're good. And like, diet, exercise, that's it. But there's so much more to it. I think sunlight is one of those other pillars of health that is super, super important. And we just think about it like logically, right? Humans are adapted to full spectrum sunlight 24/7. So if we take a human out of its natural primordial environment and put it in this alien environment that is the indoor environment. Exactly.
Hospitals.
24/7. We're not going to see good outcomes, right? It's gonna be bad. And that's what we're seeing today. So it's unfortunate.
I lived it firsthand. So I always grew up in hot environments and where there's a lot of sunlight. I was born in Israel. I grew up in Nigeria, Africa, and then LA, and then Vegas, and then Florida. So I've always had heat and sunlight and all of that. 2024, I was sick as hell, in and out of hospitals. Last hospitalization was 2 weeks. No sunlight, can't move out of the bed. It was awful. And I started fantasizing about the beach. And I was like, wow, if I can ever walk again by myself and tolerate the heat and be on my own and be healthy again, I'm going to the beach. And it was hard for me to even walk back then. My heart was racing. And I healed myself many ways. I had a functional Eastern medicine doctor, lots of things like that. But I went to the beach all the time, Clearwater Beach, grounding and walking in mineral water and absorbing the sun.
Yeah.
That is literally how I healed myself. And there's no question about it. It is still my happy place. I don't even feel like I can walk in grass today because of the ticks. I don't know. I just think the government, Bill Gates, whatever, has released too many ticks. I don't want to walk in the grass. But the beach, the grounding, the mineral water, and the sun, and the air, I don't think it can be beat as far as health.
Yeah.
Like 100%. Impossible, right?
100%. Yeah, exactly. And my whole concept around like health is very simple, right? We just need to get back to the basics.
Yes.
And then once we're out there, we can do these sort of other modalities. But like if we can get back to the basics, that's going to have a tremendous impact. And like you said, like you can reverse things with just the basic stuff: sunlight, grounding, fresh air, community, whole foods.
Oh, it's crazy, right? Like, listen to this. You'd appreciate this. So late 40s, I get really sick, heart's racing. Nobody knows what's wrong with me, but all the MRI, CT scans, echocardiograms, nothing's wrong with my heart, right? Nothing. But the heart's like at 180 even when I'm sleeping. It wakes me up. I'm constantly in ambulances and they try to put me on beta blockers. And I've never been a fan of the hospital system, but I don't know what to do because my nervous system's having a meltdown. So when I left the hospital system, I was on the highest dose of heart failure medication and nothing is wrong with my heart. My Ayurvedic functional doctor was like, Marit, look at the side effects of your heart medication that's supposed to keep your heart from racing. One of the side effects is it's going to make you have irregular, fast heartbeats, and nothing's wrong with your heart. So I reversed in less than a year, proven by DEXA and things like that, osteoporosis, anemia, low ferritin, so many things. I can't even tell you the amount of things that were wrong with me, vitamin deficiencies, vitamin C, all of these types of things, micro blood clots. I did live blood test.
Yeah.
But the sun is one of the biggest healthy things beyond that. Walking and eating healthy. I'm carnivore and I'm super healthy on my lifestyle, but I cannot live without the sun. And when it's raining for 2 weeks straight and I can't get to the beach and I actually feel depressed.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I feel it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, seasonal depressive disorder is. Like, it's a real
It's
thing.
a real thing, right? And we're in Florida, so we should be ashamed of ourselves to even claim that we could have depression from the sun.
Yeah.
Now, I really want to ask you about this because I am the most annoying person at the beach. And I want you to explain it to people so I don't have to be the bad guy everywhere I go. I'm at the beach with my best friend, Diana, and she's wearing her sunglasses. And I'm like, Diana, take those off. This is really bad for you. You're going to burn. And then I see tourists in the water with sunglasses on. And I start explaining to them that they're going to get a sunburn and to take their darn sunglasses off and that you need to literally have the sun signaling through your eyes. Can you explain it to them so I'm not the bad guy everywhere I go?
Yeah, so there's a few things happening here. I'll first talk about like the circadian side of it.
Yeah.
So with our circadian system, one, we want that brightness of light,
yes.
but we also want like that blueness of light. And with sunglasses, it's going to reduce both of those. So sunglasses, I mean, anyone who's put on sunglasses knows that, it darkens your environments. One, you're not getting that brightness of the light. So that stimulus, that brightness stimulus is not going to be there. But also it does affect the blueness that is coming into your eyes. So you're not going to be getting as much of a circadian stimulus when you wear the sunglasses. And yeah, your circadian rhythm will govern the effect of your body to tan to a degree and all these other things. I mean, metabolism and all this stuff. So just all your bodily functions are governed by that. So if you're not getting the right light signals into your eyes, that's going to have downstream effects. Now, directly to the like sun tanning response. So I love to talk about this because, it's all over social media, like, oh, you got to stop wearing sunglasses. And I think it's true to a degree. I think, if we share the science, that's gonna be the best thing. So
yes.
The science that we currently have is limited. I'll first say that. We have some rat studies. I'll first talk about the rat studies and then we'll talk about humans. We have some rat studies where we can basically cover the full body of a rat with aluminum foil. And then we can shine, just having their eyes exposed, we can shine UV light onto these rats' eyes. And we actually have the whole mechanism behind this and everything. And what happens is through nitric oxide propagation through the eye and through the optic nerve and all this, what happens is that our body produces what's called POMC, pro-opiomelanocortin, this very large pro-hormone, about 267, I think, amino acids long. And our body can basically cleave it, so it can cut this big pro-hormone into a bunch of different little peptides. And one of the peptides it cuts it into is alpha MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone. People take this with like, what is the peptide? Melanotan. That's what melanotan is, just alpha MSH. But our body produces this alpha MSH via this UV light going into the eyes. And this is in rats, right? So in rats, UV light onto the eyes, producing POMC, producing alpha MSH, increasing the tanning response. So we actually see these rats will actually become tan just with UV light hitting their eyes, not their skin at all, and they still tan. Now we can do the same thing. We can take the aluminum foil off of the rat's body, just put the aluminum foil over their eyes, shine UV light on their full body.
And they won't tan.
And well, so they do tan, but
Okay.
it's to a much lesser degree than if you just do it on the eyes. So if you're thinking about this logically, well, then the conclusion would probably be, all right, if we expose these rats, and they haven't done this in the study, but if we expose these rats to UV light to their eyes and their full body, so nothing covered at all, we probably see the greatest tanning response. That's going to allow the body to be more resilient to strong sunlight
Yes.
and not burn as much, right? That's the concept there. Now, again, these are in rats. When we look at the mechanism at play here, the entire UV light onto the eye with the nitric oxide and going to produce POMC, that's fully conserved within the human. So it's reasonable to believe that this exact same mechanism is happening with humans.
Yeah.
We don't have the human studies. We have tons of anecdotes, right? So, I mean, all over social media, people will say, I stopped wearing my sunglasses and I don't burn anymore.
That's right.
It's all over. And so I have to be like receptive to those anecdotes. I'm not going to just like dismiss the anecdotes. I think that's very real. I mean, the human experience is probably the best evidence somebody has for
Yes.
whatever they have. I mean, you can read studies all day long, and if it goes against your human experience, you're probably not going to believe the studies.
Of course.
Right? So I think that human experience is very important. Those anecdotes are very important. It would be lovely to see some human studies on this. We don't have them. But I will say, again, from this sort of primordial perspective, humans were designed not to have sunglasses on, right? We were designed to have the same light spectrum touch the eye as it also does touch the skin.
Yeah.
So it should never be a different light spectrum touching the eye than the skin. It should always be the same.
That makes so much sense.
From that logical perspective, it makes sense to limit sunglasses. Now, I want to put this point out there because like I don't really hear people talk about this, but you look at like old Italian men in Italy, right?
Yeah.
They're super, super tan. They wear sunglasses. So I think there's probably a very individualistic like thing happening here. So I think depending on the individual, they're going to be more sensitive to, but like potentially some individuals will produce more of a tan when they get exposed to UV light on their eyes versus some individuals, maybe they get a great tan with just UV on their skin. So I think it's very individualistic. And again, like these old Italian guys, they wear sunglasses. I don't think it's the end of the world.
Yeah.
I don't wear sunglasses.
Same, only in pictures. If I gotta look bad, I'm in the sun. But other than the picture, I'm not wearing them. Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't see that as the biggest deal as probably it's made to be on social media.
Yeah.
But I definitely think, people can definitely be cognizant of it. And people see that they tan better and they don't burn as much not wearing sunglasses, then keep not wearing sunglasses.
So be it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I learned this from my doctor, Anthony Chafee, the carnivore doctor. We were in Cannes in the film festival in France a few months ago. I became carnivore this year. And he explained to me that you will not burn on carnivore. You will not burn. And so we were in the sun all day and I got red. And when we all went back to the Airbnb, he was there with his fiance, Elle. I was like, but you told me I can't burn and I'm like a little tomato. And he's like, that's not a burn.
Yeah.
He goes, that's not a burn. You're not going to peel and it's going to go away. So I didn't even understand the difference between a sunburn and not. And I'll tell you, a few days ago, I went to the beach. I go to Clearwater Beach, but I like to catch the sun. So I'll go at 6:30, 7 in the morning. And then I leave before it's even 10 a.m. But I woke up late and I was like, I'm still going to the beach.
Nice.
And I went between 9 and 11 and the entire time I was in the water. I came home like a tomato. My entire face was bright red.
Yeah.
But it really did go away within hours. I did not peel. It was gone. I had no burn whatsoever the next day.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't wear my sunglasses and I'm carnivore. I don't know. I'm assuming.
Yeah, so the redness is erythema. So simply what erythema is essentially, we have blood vessels all throughout our skin and we have capillaries that go into our skin as well. And with, intense sun exposure, what happens is some of the blood vessels will burst a little bit. It's not a big deal, but they'll burst a little bit. Some of the blood will get into the skin, and that's what the redness is.
Yeah.
It actually is a great protective effect on the human body. So the body is designed to create this erythema when it's getting a lot of sun exposure, because blood is actually a great defense mechanism to UV light. So blood is it's basically like your own sunscreen. Like we have melanin, right? But blood is sort of that instant sort of protection effect that our body goes into when you're getting a lot of sun exposure. So yeah, it's basically just erythema. Erythema goes away. If you get way too much erythema, then that can be that could be a problem. But yeah, it's just,
I'm also not one of these people that will go there and just sit there at noon for hours on end, or I don't do that either.
Yeah.
I'm careful on when I'm laying out in the sun all day. Do you use sunscreen?
So I was just telling somebody recently, I bought a sunscreen from my local farmer's market where it's like super small, like this big. 3 years ago. Not even half of it's gone. So I barely use sunscreen.
And what's in it? What's in the one you bought?
Yeah, all the one that I have is just beef tallow, zinc oxide, and a couple essential oils.
That's it. That's the whole thing.
I've eaten my sunscreen before.
but you don't even use it.
No, I barely use it. So when I will use it, sometimes I'll use it like on my nose right here, just because I know that's where like I get a lot of sun exposure. Just how the body is sort of designed, you'll get a lot of sun exposure on your nose. I'll use it if I know I'm going to be getting too much sun exposure to the point where I may burn.
You're going to fry.
So exactly. So if I'm at that point where it's like, maybe I'm at the beach with friends and like, I don't want to like leave them and go into shade or something like that. Like I'll put on some sunscreen. If I do use sunscreen, again, it's only mineral-based sunscreen, as limited amount of ingredients as possible, and just be smart about it. Like the best sun protection is shade and clothing, and then your own melanin within the body. And to do that, you want regular sun exposure every single day, a little bit at a time, gradually building that melanin up, getting a tan, a healthy tan. And that's the best sun exposure. I mean, melanin dissipates 99.9% of UV light into non-harmful heat. So when UV light hits the skin, gets absorbed by melanin, instead of that UV light penetrating the melanin and getting to our DNA, this is eumelanin. Instead of that eumelanin, what that eumelanin does is it will absorb that UV light, dissipate it as heat, and that heat is not harmful to us. So melanin is the best sunscreen, the best protection from light, and it's how we're designed to be. So yeah, it's and we can gradually build up more and more melanin if we're smart about our sun exposure.
That's right.
That's the best sunscreen.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now I have a question about cardiovascular disease and nitric oxide and how that relates to sunlight.
Yeah, this is great. So most people think, like when we look at the UV light spectrum, most people think, all right, I'm getting sunlight and I'm getting UV light just for like vitamin D.
Yes.
Right? But
that's how I think of it usually. I'm here for my vitamin D.
But it's so much more. So Richard Weller, who is a dermatologist, and he jokes that he has no dermatology friends because he's a pro-sunlight dermatologist. And if you're a pro-sunlight dermatologist, the rest of the dermatology field doesn't like you. But Richard Weller, he's an amazing guy. He's an MD, so he's actual practicing dermatologist, but he also does a bunch of research. And him and his team were the ones who actually discovered that when UV light interacts with the skin, we actually increase the nitric oxide within our blood vessels. So nitric oxide is a super small molecule. It's just nitrogen and oxygen bound together. So very small. It has a tons of cardiovascular effects. So in our skin.
But don't we lose a lot of it as we age? We lose lots and lots of nitric oxide, right?
Yes, we do. Yeah. So there's nitric oxide stores. Just naturally, our body stores nitric oxide in the skin. So in the epidermis of our skin, we have nitric oxide stores. Now, when UV light hits the skin and absorbs those nitric oxide stores, it basically immobilizes those nitric oxide stores, brings the nitric oxide to our blood vessels. And then when it gets into our blood vessels, nitric oxide, what it does is it vasodilates the blood vessels. So it basically opens up the blood vessels, more blood flow can occur, and then we can reduce blood pressure. And we see this we have animal studies looking at this, and then Richard Weller has done human clinical trials where he shines UV light on people, measures their blood pressure, blood flow increases, blood pressure reduces. And then what we see is, and him and his team have published some great observational studies on this, where very large, 400,000 participants, showing that the people who get the most amount of sun exposure have the lowest risk of cardiovascular death. So we are preventing cardiovascular disease with more and more sun exposure. And one of the reasons for that is this nitric oxide component. So nitric oxide having that cardiovascular benefit, and it's super simple. So now Richard Weller and his team have looked at this mainly from UVA. So when we look at UV light spectrum, we can split it up into UVA and UVB.
Yep.
UVA is a longer wavelength of UV light. UVB is a shorter. UVB is what produces vitamin D, and it's only UVB that produces vitamin D. And then UVA can have this nitric oxide effect. Now more and more research is coming out right now. Richard Weller is saying this, how UVB can also mobilize nitric oxide, increase nitric oxide within our blood vessels. So it's the full UV light spectrum that is having this effect. And yeah, improvements in cardiovascular disease, which is huge. So I think that is one, and what is the leading cause of death in the United States? Cardiovascular disease. And what are people not getting enough of? Sunlight.
Of course.
And when we look at like the stats, like 93% of an American's day is spent indoors. When we're indoors, we're not exposed to the full sunlight spectrum, but we're not exposed to any UV. We're not getting that cardiovascular effect from the full light sunlight spectrum, 90%, 93% and plus of our day. And that's definitely a component of why we're seeing such high rates of cardiovascular disease, without a doubt. So I think that's probably one of the simplest thing to reduce cardiovascular risk, and that's, get more sunlight.
I love it.
Yeah.
Vitamin D versus sunlight. And I watch a lot of stuff on this. I read a lot of stuff on this. My vitamin D levels are decent, but I go out in the sun. I live in Florida and I supplement. So can you explain to me, please, is it important to supplement? Is it enough to go out in the sun? Obviously, it's not the same thing.
Yeah, I'm actually doing a ton of research on this right now, so it's on the top of my mind. So here, I'll first say what happens when we take a vitamin D supplement. So most vitamin D supplements are either vitamin D3 or vitamin D2. Basically, this precursor right before we get to the active form of 1,25-dihydroxy vitamin D3. That's that active form of vitamin D. When we take a supplement, that goes into our gut, it gets absorbed in our gut, it goes to our bloodstream, and then it goes to the liver. It gets converted into that active form of vitamin D, and then we'll have the effects of that active form of vitamin D. That's when we take the supplement. Now, what happens when we get exposed to sunlight is way more than just that. Yeah. So when UV light hits the skin, we have cholesterol in our skin, and it hits cholesterol, it breaks the cholesterol bond, it opens cholesterol up, turning cholesterol into pre-vitamin D3. That pre-vitamin D3 gets converted into D3. Now there's a few things that happen here. Actually, 4 things can happen. So one, the vitamin D3 can go and get sent into the liver and do the same thing as what we're taking with the supplement. So that's one simple thing. And that's sort of like that conventional approach what you see in the textbooks. More and more research is coming out showing how that D3 that is produced in the skin via sunlight has so many other routes that it can go. So a few things. One, it can be converted into L3 and T3, which are these other sort of metabolites of this D3. And L3 and T3, for the past 8 years, we thought they had no effect on the human body. This just gets to the poor methodology of science. It's like, if our body's producing something, there's going to be an effect on it, right?
Of course.
We're recently finding out that there is actually some benefits. I guarantee you there's even more benefits we're talking about here, but there are benefits of that alone. Now, what's also interesting is that within the skin, without even going to the liver, that D3 can actually be converted into the active form of vitamin D within the skin, and that's going to have local effects on the skin. Whereas when you take the supplement, right, you're getting that active form of vitamin D converted in the liver, but then that's just going through the bloodstream and going to other organs. It's not being localized to the skin.
Wow.
So there's a whole complex system at play when we're getting exposed to UV light and UVB light, but obviously the full sunlight spectrum, but even if we just want to focus on UVB, there's a whole complex array of things and chemical reactions that are happening when we're being exposed to UVB light on the skin that we're not getting from the supplement. Now, that said, I think that there is a time and place for supplementation. So especially people are in much northern latitudes, they can supplement, because I think like Washington State, they have 3 months or something in the winter where there's no UVB light at all. Wow. It's not even present. So there's definitely time and place for supplementation there. There's a company that recently just came out, first FDA approved UVB light therapy panel. It's called Soleus.
Wow.
And they have a very targeted UVB action spectrum. So they target a specific wavelength UVB light onto the skin. But what's great about this is because I'm not a fan of tanning beds or anything like that, because it's UV light in isolation. And we're not designed to get UV light in isolation. We're designed to get UV light plus the visible, plus the infrared and all that.
Yeah.
But what they have done is that they have their device basically scans your skin to see exact the amount of melanin in your skin and all that. Whoa. To direct the exact amount of UV light that isn't going to be damaging. So I see no concern around there. So I think people in northern latitudes, they can utilize some devices like that give you UVB light.
And supplement.
And supplement.
Especially if their D is low.
Exactly, yeah. So, and even with supplementation, right? there are still going to be benefits of having, higher amounts of the active form of vitamin D via that supplementation. When we look at the large observational studies, we see that people who have the highest amount of vitamin D have the lowest rates of cardiovascular disease, lowest rates of cancer, lowest rates of even like diabetes. But what's interesting is that then we go to like large clinical trials where they're doing a randomized placebo-controlled trial where they give one group vitamin D, they give one group a placebo, and we don't see the same mortality effects. Now, there are clinical trials showing other beneficial effects, but we don't see the mortality effect. So you're going to get a beneficial effect with vitamin D supplementation, but it's not going to affect the like cardiovascular disease mortality or cancer mortality, but you're going to have other effects. So I think it can have its time and place. I really see like vitamin D, like testing your vitamin D levels, I see that as like a proxy of how much sun exposure you're getting. Now, of course, change that with vitamin D supplementation. So I think there's a time and place. I'm not like fully against it. I've taken vitamin D in the past when I'm up in North Carolina, especially during like cold and flu season. Like I'll take some vitamin D.
Vitamin D.
Yeah. So this is what's really interesting is that so the international agency that gives us the RDA, the recommended daily allowance of vitamin D, they came out in 2011 saying that we need around 600 IUs, international units of vitamin D per day. In 2014 and then a follow-up in 2015, there was two independent statisticians that came out. They looked at the data that the international agency used to come up with that 600 IUs, and they found out that there was a calculation error within their calculation of how much IUs of vitamin D we should be taking.
Was it supposed to be like 6,000 or something?
Yes, exactly. Way higher. It was almost 15 times higher than what they were telling us to take. Their conclusion was the 2014 paper, I think they said 8,000 IUs of vitamin D. The 2015 paper, I think said like 7,000 IUs of vitamin D. But completely
significantly different numbers. Wow.
So I'm a big proponent if people are taking vitamin D is like take at least 5,000 IUs of vitamin D.
I love that. Okay.
Vitamin D toxicity is almost non-existent. I mean, it can happen, but I mean, I was just reading a clinical trial yesterday where they were giving vitamin D supplementation, no adverse outcomes, 100,000 IUs of vitamin D. So like some people will say like, oh, vitamin D toxicity, it is a thing with supplementation, but it is so rare. Yeah.
For you to overdose on that, the chances are almost zero.
Anyone who's taking like 5,000 IUs, there's no concern.
There's no way they're going to.
Yeah.
I love
that.
And
now my one thing with vitamin D supplementation is always find a vitamin D that's vitamin D plus K2.
I do. That's how I take it. Yeah.
And that's perfect.
That's awesome. Well, I'm only going to ask you one more question because I want to interview you for hours, but Tomo wants to interview you. The lollies want to interview you. So I'm going to be courteous, but I could sit with you and ask you questions all day. Now, Huberman and all these influencer doctors and scientists all follow you. You're 21 years old and you're already so smart. I think they consider you a part of the scientific and doctor community. But I would like to ask you something controversial. And if you don't want to answer it, I understand. You wanted to be a doctor. And you and I have similar philosophy on certain things that occurred in 2020 and before 2020. But you originally wanted to be a doctor and then you changed your mind. You're still going to study whether you get a PhD or you become whichever scientific direction you go in. But can you honestly tell us why you chose not to become a doctor?
Yeah, so I've never had a vaccine in my entire life. So growing up, my family, we were raised with this concept that the body has the innate capacity to heal and that if you give it the right conditions, that it can actually do a healing. So I never went to a doctor growing up. I never have taken any pharmaceutical drug in my entire life.
You've never had a headache. I saw in your videos.
Never had a headache. Someone commented or someone replied to my story on that and they were like, so you don't know what it feels like to have a headache?
That's so crazy. I have no clue. Your mom said you never threw up. All four of you were just healthy. Kudos to mom.
Yeah. So yes, my mom is the reason for that. I'm so super blessed to have her in my life and to have her raise me and my siblings that way. And so I've never had a vaccine. Growing up, pre-K to 12th grade, I give them my exemption, all good. College, give them my exemption, all good. And so for me, it was never a thought like, oh, you would have to get a vaccine for medical school. But I recently found out.
But do you have to get a vaccine for? Is it at any medical school in the U.S.?
Yeah. So I recently found out that it would. So I would potentially be able to get accepted into a med school, but I would have no guarantee and highly unlikely to be able to get into rotations, which is the last 2 years of medical school to graduate. So I wouldn't.
So you wouldn't be a doctor.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to.
So you technically cannot be a doctor in the United States, or the chances are almost zero if you are not vaccinated.
Yeah, exactly. So that's
ridiculous.
Yeah. So that was a big logistical barrier because I'm not going to be getting vaccinated, my personal choice. And I think people need to have that personal choice.
Yes.
And so yeah, I'm not planning on getting vaccinated, never have been vaccinated. So that's what made me have to like, decide to not go down that route. And I think always for the best, once I started thinking about it more, it's like, I have so many disagreements with the standard medical establishment. I sort of wanted to be in it to sort of be a different voice of change and really, change it from the inside out. But, at the end of the day, not going to work out, unfortunately. But, hopefully we can make some change on the outside. And I hope to do so. But it was definitely a little unfortunate. But I'm excited for, what the future has in store. So
absolutely. And honestly, I'm so proud of you for that because I grew up with vaccines, less than there are today, right? I was born in 76, less than today. And I grew up in Nigeria. So, but when I became an adult in my 20s, even before all this internet, I was like, I'm not doing that. I knew it was bad. I never vaccinated my children. I'm afraid to even say that on a podcast because they will throttle you. So I don't know. I take my chances, but I think it's not cool that you get throttled for saying that. And I love that you at such a young age are starting your life the way that you were raised, the way that you believe, and it's still not going to stop you from being a scientist, but you're going to go in the direction of the beat of your own drum. And I cannot wait to see the amazing things that you do in the world. Thank you so much for everything that you do, Jonathan.
Thank you. Yeah, this is fun. I appreciate it.